attitude towards the world is determined by your history. And then when you bring yourself to the world, your history comes with you. My name is Mncedi Madolo, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist working in downtown Johannesburg. I am from a small village town out in the Eastern Cape called Gwasagi location. Where home is, there are a lot of war sites where there was the land issue. This is now the Boer, the British fighting to encroach onto the land. One of the longest battle they had, or rather, you can't even call it a battle, it really was a war, for at least 100 years, was with the Xhosa people. And it took a while for them to be able to take over this land. I then decide in 2017, after practicing for a while in the Eastern Cape, to move to Johannesburg. A lot of my installation work, a lot of how I view my place in Johannesburg, is influenced by this attempt at reflecting. If you look outside my window, for instance, there's a whole burgeoning market of European waste in the form of thrift clothes, that have come from these first world big financial engines. And this is where those things land up. The collage works, for instance, started off as a way for me to kind of communicate to people back home the attitude of Johannesburg. How does it feel to actually be in the streets, So I had to think about the kind of materials that would communicate this a bit better. The posters on the sides of the streets started making their ways into the canvas. And these aren't even like new posters. These are posters that have been beaten by the elements. They've been in the rain, they've been in the sun, and so they have time in them. And you can't buy time in the art shop. Knowing these small nuances that come with engaging big business and the way they present themselves to us is something that I've chosen to incorporate into my own work. So what we have here is the more popular collage works.
This is, I suppose, how I made my name.
And the material is always very important. So one of the things that I would do is that I would go around the city and actually collect these, scrape them off of the walls, take them. Some of them are just posters. One thing that you will find, for instance, people don't take these things off. They just stick their story on top of an already existing story and on top of another existing story. And that's pretty much kind of what characterizes the city, in that it's always someone on top of another. It's always stories on top of other stories, much like the technique of collaging, where you have this adding, removing, tearing, subtracting. Was I always into magazine and ads while I was growing up? Most of it was from marketing psychologies. The way people make logos, you have to hire a professional who understands color, who understands balance and composition. And these are the sort of things that are used to trap your eyes. And so I was trapped in magazines and ads from a very young age. Not necessarily on purpose, but then I've decided to use these in my work. What do you do with people's attentions? This is really the part that I'm more conscious of lately. The type of work that I make is experimental, because I delve a great deal into installation work. I've started really building my soft sculpture body of work, which is what I'm working on right now, I suppose, for the past 2 or so years.
What this actually is,
it's a cross between one of those furnaces that I mentioned earlier on and a fertility doll. The thing towers, I think, about 3.5, maybe 4 meters, and is about 1.5 in width. And what you find here are some 3D printed beads, and the 3D printed beads and then color coded, because beads all have their various colors
and meaning.
One of the things that I have been trying to figure out is actually getting the colors just right, you know? Because before we started using glass beads, we were making our own beads.
What we have here on the floor, for instance, some of my very earlier works, this is a piece from, I think, 2017 or 2018. This one is definitely dated 2017. This is a view from my first studio on Commissioner Street when I first came to Johannesburg.
I think my style has got a lot to do with being influenced by downtown Johannesburg. The busyness of the streets gives it the pop that it needs. This is pretty much how the collage works start. Some of the challenges an artist would face in downtown Joburg is firstly the busyness, you know? Also, it has to be maybe trying to get everybody else to understand the purpose of art and educating those who are not necessarily well versed in the understandings and knowing of the purpose of fine art. One of my biggest things that influences my practice is my moving away from materials purchased at the art shop, but rather finding existing materials that have their own characteristics in them, you know? They have their own language. And then when you piece these things together, they give you like a very nice way of expressing yourself
without having to be too stringent in the traditional ways of making work.
So I suppose that's what I would kind of call my style of work, is experimental for the most part. If I'm trying to maybe make some kind of commentary about places of gathering, using iconic imagery
like the minibus taxi is a very big part of our culture and our everyday life.
So it would make sense to use these as
reference material.
This installation over here is meant to symbolize downtown Joburg and some of the problems that we're facing, which is litter for the most part. And the taxi is kind of meant to be the symbol for the lifeblood of downtown, in fact, the whole country, you know, in fact, the whole continent, because the minibus taxi
is the symbol of public transportation and communal moving of people. And so how you cleanse such a thing, you don't just start by just picking up litter, but you actually start by cleansing the spirit, the idea, the way we feel about the environment, you know, to try and usher in a new way of thinking. That's kind of what the direction I was hoping for with this artwork.
So fortunately, as an artist, I am in a position where I can put my experiences
into the canvas. And then the canvas gets to travel into all sorts of spaces and places
that I might not necessarily be able to set foot in. I try to do my part by engaging in this research, you know, thanks to the technologies and the social medias and all these.